And with that, we are almost through. I hope you guys are all still awake and pumped for our final fireside chat of the day. So we have our esteemed Kara Swisher back. For those of you who haven't had a chance to see her earlier today, she is Silicon Valley's most feared and at the same time well-liked journalist and a very powerful voice in tech. So she is joining us for another fireside conversation with the famous Mark Cuban from the Dallas Mavericks and Shark Tank. And they are going to talk about entrepreneurship as a driving force for growing the global economy. Please welcome Kara and Mark.
Hi, Mark. How you doing?
What's up, Kara? I'm great.
Where are you? You're in Texas, correct?
I'm in rainy Dallas, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in DC, where it's hot and humid as usual. So let's get started. This is I did not realize you were Romanian. Explain to the people of Texylvania.
Yeah, well, my maternal grandfather was from Bessarabia, and Bessarabia right around the time of World War I jumped between Austria and Romania. Just depending on what the border was, where you lived, right, where the border was set. So, so depending on what year we pick, I'm Romanian or any number of different nationalities.
Oh, wow. Have you been back there? Have you been there at all?
One time when I was 16, I was part of a school trip where I took my stamp collection and sold it and went on a school trip to Romania and Russia, because I was taking Russia. And so in Hungary, and so we just took like one-day stops in all these different places.
And does your grandparents emigrated from there, correct?
Yeah, all four of my grandparents came from different parts of Russia / Eastern Europe. On my mom's side, it was right around the Bessarabia, and then on my dad's side, it was more Kiev, Dnipropetrovsk in Russia, and that part of Russia.
Wow, that's amazing. So, and they left for what? What was the reason they left?
So to stay alive. I mean, I'm Jewish, and so it was either stay and die or leave and live. And so they went to New York and Passaic, New Jersey, in the case of my dad, and then Pittsburgh in the case of my mom's parents. And my dad moved to Pittsburgh, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, my family is from Italy. My grandfather emigrated from Italy. My other grandparents were here for a while. But I want to talk a little bit about what makes entrepreneurs. And I do think when I think of immigrants, I think about entrepreneurship a lot. Leaving a place and going somewhere else without a lot of prospects is a big deal. And so talk a little bit about sort of the origins. I think a lot of people sort of need to understand how you got this way, if it's a special thing, if it can be taught.
Yeah, look, I mean, my dad and my mom, for that matter, were kids of the Depression, right? And when their parents came over, they had nothing, literally nothing, didn't speak the language, and grew up, moved to the slums of the Lower East Side of New York and the equivalent, and the Hill District in Pittsburgh. Where, in my dad's family, they were one of only two white families in an all black neighborhood. You just lived where you could. And just growing up, they always just did whatever jobs they could. You paint houses, or you haul things, or, you work as a waiter. My grandfather, on my dad's side case, or on my mom's dad was a schmutza salesperson. He just,
dresses,
a briefcase of clothes, and he would go up and down West Liberty Avenue in Pittsburgh and, measure people, working class people for their clothes. People who worked in car dealerships. And, when you have that background, you're by definition an entrepreneur. You're not just getting a job and working for somebody, you're working for yourself, just trying to make it work. And that really just was passed down to me that, on one hand, my dad ended up doing upholstery on cars. And so he would take me to his work and make me sweep the floors for $5 not because he wanted me to make the $5, because he wanted me to see what it was like to do physical labor and why I needed to go to college and do something better.
Right.
And that just, and my grandfather on my mom's side, I remember we would sit there and we'd play cards. And it wasn't, normal cards. It was him turning over cards, asking me to add them or multiply them as fast as I could, just to try to, get me to learn things. And it was just, that's just the way I was brought up. Just, you have to figure it out for yourself. And that's always been the case.
So talk a little bit about what makes an entrepreneur and sort of the progression of, because you've got a lot of people here are entrepreneurs, but, it's a driving force for, we've talked about this, for innovation and recovery now, to the recovery part. But talk about what can it be something that can be taught, or do you feel like this is something obviously came from your family and you had influences that, let you understand that? So talk a little bit about what you think now are the driving forces to get people to be entrepreneurial, because I think people are more entrepreneurial than we realize.
I think inherently, we're all entrepreneurs at some level. We all have to get through our own lives and try to figure things out and make decisions for ourselves. It's just some people choose to, as they get to the point where they, have to go to college or go to school or whatever, or, you get to a point where you either want the security of working for somebody else, or you want the opportunity of working for yourself. And different people just have different reasons for choosing either direction. And I think, people who are a little bit more geared towards taking risks become entrepreneurs. People who are more geared towards looking for rewards become entrepreneurs. And then others who may initially, get a job working for somebody else might get to the point where they realize, and this happened to me, where I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I wanted some security coming out of college, and got jobs, realized I wasn't a very good employee, and, reverted back to being an entrepreneur.
What made you not? I say that to people a lot. Everyone's like, why did you go out on your own? I sort of had this sort of glide path in journalism at newspapers. And I was like, I was a bad employee. I couldn't explain it any other way. And I meant that in a good way. It's sort of like making bad trouble, like John Lewis says. Good trouble, excuse me.
Yep.
Talk about how you get people. Do people have to be entrepreneurial, and how do you get to that if you have the desire to be, but sort of have a background of safety or staying in a lane?
That's a good question, right? Because a lot of people romanticize entrepreneurship. They romanticize, starting a company or running a company, and think that, if I start a company and run a company, I won't have to work as hard as I'm working in my job right now.
Sure.
And it's obviously the exact opposite. But I think, people take different paths. I mean, I get emails all the time. I'm sure you get questions all the time. I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know what to do, right? All right, what kind of company should I start? And my response is always, if you don't know, you're not ready. Because when you start off as an entrepreneur, typically there's one thing that you feel like you can do well, that you think provides value, and you want to try to, turn that into a business. And for me, initially, when I was a kid, it was, just wanting to make money for basketball shoes, and my dad getting me to sell garbage bags door to door. And that gave me confidence in selling. And once I got confidence that I could sell garbage bags door to door, I got confidence that I could sell stamps, buy and sell stamps, which allowed me to take the trip to Russia and other places, and gave me more confidence. And that got me into other things, which, just continued to build my confidence. But for me, initially, it was just that confidence in sales. And that led to me getting a job as a tech salesperson, and then getting fired, which led me to start my own company.
What did you do to get fired? What did you just...
What did I do to get fired?
Yeah, I've gotten fired a couple times.
So I was working for a company called Your Business Software, and this is the 80s, and it was one of the very first retail software stores in Dallas, if not the very first. And I mean, this is back in the days when you had to, you sold Lotus 1-2-3 for $495
in a box.
And you had to go get authorized in order to be able to sell it. It's hysterical looking back. But some of my responsibilities were sweeping the floor and wiping down the windows and making sure the retail side of the store was open on time. And I had a deal I wanted to close, which would have gotten me a $1,500 commission, which was huge for me at the time, because I was living 6 guys in a 3-bedroom apartment. And this was the first step for me being able to move out of that S-hole, right?
Yeah.
Right, it was a dump. And so I went to my boss and said, look, I got someone to cover for me, so I'm not going to be opening up the store. Somebody else, lady named Barbara Pugh, is going to be opening up for me. And he said, no. And this is over the phone. And I'm like, well, I promised this customer. He said, no, I need you to open the store. And I made the executive decision to go pick up the check, thinking when I hand the guy a $15,000 check, it'd be all,
yeah,
good. He fired me.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, fired me.
Wow. I wonder. So you went out and did this on your own. And when you think about entrepreneurship, are there qualities? Do you have to have that quality? That's sort of, you were making an executive decision. You allowed yourself to take that risk. Talk about what it used to be like, which is sort of being a maverick, speaking of your teams.
Used to be.
Or is it not? Or is it something that you can teach people?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, you have to have one skill that you can hang your hat on. There's got to be something that gives you confidence that you're able to go out there and do your own thing. It might be sales, it might be technology, it might be the ability to recognize unique opportunities, whatever, it might be musicianship, it might be, being a journalist, whatever it may be. There's got to be one skill set that you have supreme confidence in and that you love to do. Because, the thing about being an entrepreneur, there's no limit on the hours. It's not a 9-to-5 job. People can talk about balance and trying to, level out family and everything. There's no balance, right? Because even though you may not be at work, you're thinking about work. When you're starting a company, you dream about it. It consumes you. It eats you, And so when you're in that frame of mind, you've got to love what you do. And if you love what you do, then and there's just a little bit of a competitive side to you, then you're going to want to keep on learning. And I think that's what, makes a great entrepreneur. Somebody who has something that they love to do, that they want to always get better at, and they have a little bit of a competitive side. And they also have to have the ability to sell. Because when it's your company, if you don't love the product or service enough to just want to sell it to everybody, then you're not going to succeed, because no company has ever succeeded without sales.
And do you think you can teach it? I want to get to this, why it is sort of, it collects in certain places too, like how it collects. And I know you don't necessarily agree with this, but can you teach it? Because you think about it, I think we've talked about this before, I think farmers are entrepreneurial, everything, background across the world. Most people, as you said, are entrepreneurial, but it seems as if that's not been the trend.
Yeah, I think you can teach it, but again, it takes a commitment. It's like anything else. You can learn how to play the guitar or the piano, and many people try, but you have to have that commitment. And yes, you can learn how to be an entrepreneur, but you also have to be very honest with yourself at some level about what you're good at and what you're not good at, and really make the effort to learn the things you need to learn. And most people aren't willing to do it. Everybody, I hear this with entrepreneurs. I have the will to win. I know I'm going to be successful. I just feel that I'm special. Everybody's got that feeling, but most people don't have the feeling that they want to do the work. And that's the difference. It's not that anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur can't be an entrepreneur. I think they can, but most people don't want to do the work. And so when someone comes to me and says, I want to be an entrepreneur, where do I go? What's a great business to start? I already tell them you've already lost, right? Because you haven't found something that you're willing to commit all your time to be great at. Because part two to be an entrepreneur is you have to compete. There's always somebody looking to kick your ass out there. And if you're not looking to ever improve and get smarter and better at what you're doing, hopefully me or one of my companies is going to come along and crush you.
Right.
And so that's part of it too. Starting is one thing, competing and, continuing to compete is the bigger thing.
Do you look at things? So you've made different calls of entrepreneurs, and you obviously have a show, Shark Tank, where you talk about, are there things that you look at and you go red flag or green light? Is there certain qualities that you see in people?
Sure, of course. Red flag is not willing to sell. I'm not like this person that fired me, a guy named Michael Humecki, would be more than happy to tell me where to buy my suits, when I was buying them 2 for $99, and more than happy to tell me what kind of sunglasses I should buy when I wouldn't even consider owning a pair of sunglasses and spending that money, but he would not go on a sales call. And I learned so much, and I worked at another company for a little bit of time, same thing. And so often you learn more from the bad companies than you do from the good companies. But you've got to be willing to sell, and you've got to be willing to commit. That's just a core competency that applies to every entrepreneur.
And what about ones that you see and you're like, no, you can't do it?
Well, we're talking about red flags. And so if you're not willing to sell, that's one thing. If you're not a learner, right, that's another thing. If you're not willing to change your mind, that's another thing, right? Because business is fluid. The only constant is change. And you have to be you have to be a willing learner, a lifelong learner. And you've got to realize that the next best idea that comes along and the next great idea can completely decimate your first idea.
Right,
It's not a bad thing. I mean, I used to go to bookstores when that was a thing. And literally, before I could afford to buy the books, I would go through the magazine and just look for one idea, right? So when we were starting broadcast.com as AudioNet, and I was looking for anything I could stream, right? I just looking for content anywhere. I would go to Barnes and Noble or wherever, and I would pick up cat magazines. I'll never forget. There's a cat magazine, but I gotta look to see if there's any great cat content that I could put on AudioNet, because people who really care about cats would go through the hassle of setting up all the things they needed to go online to listen to audio online. And so you've got to be willing to make that commitment. And if you're not, then there's no chance, right? There's just no chance, because again, the people who don't succeed aren't willing to just go all in.
Right.
And you see that there's always something they have the things they won't do, right? Well, I've got to do this first, or this comes first, or if you're not consumed by it, it's not going to work. That's not to say there aren't exceptions, right? But, more often than not, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I would wake up in the middle of the night because I was dreaming about work, and I would write something down or send an email or whatever, just because, it came to me then. And no great entrepreneur that I know hasn't done that.
Yep. 100%. Yeah, it often, and I actually have a little notebook I keep with me when I come up with ideas. You're also willing to commit to trying different things if you need to, like trying different things. So talk a little bit about the global idea of it. Is it concentrated in places? And you're not one of the proponents that Silicon Valley, although there's a great concentration of innovation there and continues to be, really, although there's issues around California, right? But you've always been one that talent is everywhere. So there's two questions. Why does that happen? Yeah, why does it happen, and do you think it has to happen that way?
So there's two questions there. Globally, right? So I think the United States, far more than any other country, is entrepreneurial. And I was at an event one time, and this guy says to me, the one thing that separates the United States from every other country in the world is our sense of entrepreneurship, our commitment to innovation and entrepreneurship. And that guy was Joe Biden. And, he would talk, and literally when we were talking about China, this is 5 years ago. And he said, look, China's always going to be a fast copier. And as long as we continue to innovate and stay ahead, we'll be okay with China because we can compete. And he's right. Globally, when you look at the United States compared to China, who's our greatest rival economically and technologically, or even Russia or other places, they don't have that entrepreneurial spirit that the United States has. There is no Chinese dream like there is the American dream. And so globally, I think that really sets us apart. Domestically, there's hubs. Steve Jobs famously said, everything's a remix. And so when you're in an area that has a certain hub, then it's easier to remix, and the people who are part of the remix are more than willing to spend money on it. And so when you look at the Valley, and you start with Hewlett-Packard, and then you get to Apple, and then everything extends from there, and then you see an ecosystem that's built out and the money that chases that, and it grows. You saw the same thing with Michael Dell in Austin. Austin had no tech scene whatsoever, and then Dell Computer opens up down there and just, starts as PC Limited out of a dorm room and just keeps on growing and growing and growing. And as he acquires companies, he moves it down there. We saw it in Dallas for a while with with Texas Instruments and other with a telecom corridor. You saw it back in the day, if you'll remember, Route 128, when there was Wang and DEC and all these companies, and there was an ecosystem up there. And so it is, something that when there's a type of industry that's located in one region, you're going to get growth in an ecosystem. And that's happened with Silicon Valley. But just like we saw an end to the telecom corridor in Dallas, or the 128 in Boston and Massachusetts. We're seeing, I think, the same result with Silicon Valley right now for a variety of reasons, but I think it's happening there. But at the same time, you're seeing Austin explode. You're seeing Dallas really increase. You're seeing Nashville really grow. You're seeing all these what used to be considered secondary markets really take off. Pittsburgh's another great example. It went from being a stale town to a no town to a leave town to UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, really becoming a hub for medical technology, leading to Google and Facebook opening up in Bakery Square, this area there, where it's just become an AI hub, and Carnegie Mellon University being very symbiotic to all that, right? So they were smart to see, okay, this is what's happening to UPMC, so we're going to expand our AI and engineering school even bigger than it was before. So that created a strong base in Pittsburgh. So you're seeing everybody learn.
How do you do that abroad? I mean, you're talking about U.S. companies where you believe innovation is the strongest, but how do you then create that elsewhere? Can it be created by a government? Can it be, China is very top down. I think we both can agree that a lot of what's going on in China is not just fast copying, it's real innovation.
Well, it's trying. I don't know. See, I would argue with you on that even with facial recognition, where they're doing a lot of stuff with AI, because they don't have semiconductor chips and they don't really have a strong AI base per se, that it's a lot of fast copying. And that's part of our challenge. But to answer your question, I think, particularly now, for foreign countries, unfortunately, and I say this as a proud American, there's no better time given our immigration laws in the United States, because up until 3 years ago, it was the United States universities were the destination, right? For anything technological, you went to a United States university, and there was a very good chance you were going to stay here, and that was to our benefit, right? Well, we've thrown that away. So you look at Canada as one example. If you look at what's happening around McGill University with AI and what Canada has done, I've got a couple investments in Montreal and Toronto, and the government is very supportive. So there are grants, not investments, but actual grants that they'll give to advanced technology companies to push them forward. So now you have this confluence of McGill continuing to expand for AI, the proximity to the United States of Canada without it being in the United States, the ability to go to McGill and other great Canadian universities and stay there. And so now you're seeing an explosion of AI and AI-built companies in Canada, and particularly Montreal. And that can, I don't want to say easily, but can certainly be replicated elsewhere around the world if they've got a strong university base.
So a university, a government willing to make grants and investments, and what else?
And then, probably minimal friction to start a company. So if you look at Estonia, right? And I'm not an Estonian expert, but they've become primarily digital, right? It's easy and straightforward. You see a lot of companies that outsource to Eastern European companies in terms of product development and software development, because there's not a lot of friction there. And the schools, when it comes to technology, are not bad at all. There's a lot of good learning sources. And the other thing about technology, you can be self-taught. You can learn a lot of things by using online resources in addition to university. And so as long as there's not a lot of friction to start that business and to export your services, then you can build a strong technological base.
Do you think a physical ecosystem is needed? I mean, here we are in the middle of COVID, especially bad here in this country, but
not anymore.
Not anymore. Talk about that, because that was the idea, was physical proximity, the ability to mix and match in a region like Silicon Valley was a good example of that. What has changed from COVID? And we talked about, you and I talked about America 2.0, but let's talk about World 2.0.
Right.
What is, because we're talking to people in Romania, what's the opportunity and then the challenge?
So two things, right? When it comes to technology, there's hardware, and that still requires proximity, because just the nature of designing physical goods is different. But the explosion in the pandemic has forced people to go digital at so many levels that, what would have been a course of 10 years, got accelerated and deflated down to 12 months. And so I think there really is an opportunity for World 2.0, if you will, to really enhance skill sets, really to invest in the education. So here's the race, right? There truly is an intellectual race with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is hard. It is very, very hard to do, and it's expensive. Already in the United States, we have AI haves and AI have-nots. And we know who all the haves are. And the fact that you can't really name more than 10 shows you how many have-nots there are. But part of the challenge is it's expensive because you have to go on cloud computing resources, AWS, Azure, whatever you choose to do. That's not cheap. And there's a lot of reiterations involved in developing models and also applying those to business, and a lot of risk involved in applying them to business. We don't really have a strong strategy that's been implemented here in the United States in terms of research and support. That's a huge opportunity for Romania, every country that has a strong educational base. And I hate to be giving away our global secrets here, but it's pretty straightforward that, for a country, any country, to invest in the future, which is AI and robotics, right? Personalized medicine. There's things that are pretty obvious and, right at the top of everybody's list, quantum computing. If you invest in those things, particularly in your universities, and then you create a platform that, maybe there's a shared cloud platform for all, for startups coming or for R&D projects coming out of those universities or in those universities, you're going to have a shot. That's what China's done that's well, but China, again, they educate a lot of their kids here, even though they're graduating more engineers, by whatever multiple of engineers that we graduate here, they don't have that entrepreneurial spirit. I think there's a lot more of that in Eastern Europe, Romania, and in that region. And so I think there's an opportunity to invest in education, invest in a platform that allows startups to share that platform, take the Canadian, in fact, still what Canada's doing, replicate the Canadian model because they're really doing it right.
That's interesting. When you think about what the most promising areas, you named a bunch of them, AI, healthcare, what areas do you think are the most promising for innovation? A lot of places, at least, are not innovating. Commerce, it feels like it's baked. It's not. Of course, nothing's ever baked, as you know.
Oh, it's not. It's not. Right? So nothing is baked right now. Nothing. Because as I said, AI is changing everything. There's a reason why, in terms of the stock market, in terms of sales, in terms of profits, the Amazons, even Walmart now is sneaking into that group. The Microsofts, the Netflix, the Apples, the Facebooks, right? They've been working on AI for 10 years. They've already made their mistakes. They learned when it was cheaper and easier to do, well, not easier, cheaper and slower to do, but when there was less at stake. Now those companies have had enough experience and they've hired a lot of the best engineers and keep on reinvesting that are real, one of the reasons you can't break them up here in the United States is because they're our best AI and advanced technology resources. And so, nothing is baked because AI is still ever evolving. The number of AI research papers, if you go to Archive, the online resource, the number of AI research papers has exploded. And you see a lot of them coming from China, but they're all little things on the margin. They're not really groundbreaking. Right. And so the ability to become part of that ecosystem, the AI ecosystem, the robotics ecosystem, the personalized or digitized medicine ecosystem is enormous right now. But it's difficult to do on a small entrepreneurial basis. And so, picking an area, for Romania as an example, to pick an area they want to dominate and say, this is who we are, and this is where we're going to, take advantage of the our universities and the base of, intellect that we have. That's a real opportunity to pick something to be great at it, so you become the destination for that. Again, like McGill has done in Canada for AI, they've really, posed estimation and a lot of, related things. They're great at it. They're kicking everybody's ass. And that's an opportunity for any country.
Are there some outlying, I want to finish up talking about, are there some outlying areas of innovation that you see in areas that you're like, this is over for innovation, or is there no area that's over for innovation? I mean, you're seeing a lot in cars, even though it seems like Wall Street has just selected Tesla as the only electric vehicle.
But, that's a great point. It's not so much Wall Street has selected Tesla. There's a lot of push right now, like, bubblish type push from a lot of people to push that up. But it's a trust in Elon.
Right.
Say what you will about Elon, but the guy's a genius. He's always looking at the next thing and coming up with the next thing. And makes, to me, the ultimate entrepreneur that I look at is someone like Elon, where he does shit and he goes, and he makes you think, why didn't I think of that? And I get pissed. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Right. There's certain entrepreneurs that do that, and he's one of them. And so, there's just ways to get through this and and places to go. But you just gotta find something you can be great at.
All right. Lastly, I have two more questions. One is, how do we get out? How do we recover from this pandemic? You both see it as not just a terrible thing to have happened, but also an opportunity to fix and recreate. What do you see the path to that happening, especially given all the political ramifications all over the world, not just in the United States, but all over the world?
I think vaccine comes first. And, the nice thing is you've seen a global cooperation on vaccines, not 100%. Right. You see Russia and China doing their own thing, but for the most part,
apparently, the U.S. apparently now.
Well, no, I mean, I read that, but no, that's not what's happening. Okay. There really has been global cooperation.
Great.
And, best practices are being exchanged, and there will be a vaccine. And when we get there, there'll be some things that try to go back to normal. But again, we talked about work from home. We talked about people becoming more digitally confident. We talked about the ability to learn online, and so there's so many unique opportunities that are coming globally that, we will get a vaccine. That'll build confidence. That'll help the economy. But what we've been able to learn digitally, I just think there's so many opportunities. There's just so many different ways. Like I invested in these two 17-year-old kids that are taught themselves AI and are using it to address pricing sensitivity in online commerce. Meaning, used to be that if you wanted to test different pricing of the same good, right? Widget for $1 or widget for $2, which makes me more money. You do A/B testing, or you just take a chance.
Right.
Now, using AI, they're able to do all these different types of sensitivity tests that allow you to truly see and predict the best pricing, and then gauge its effectiveness and in real time make your changes. Two 16-year-old kids doing things that weren't being done 6 months ago. And so there's so many opportunities like this, because this wholesale transition to digital opens up a lot of doors. Look at Shopify or BigCommerce, they're platforms, right? And they're platforms that haven't been fully exploited. Look at Zoom. Zoom is a platform, right, that hasn't been fully exploited. So now you're seeing more and more Zoom background companies pop up, right? The fact that we're working from home and we don't have that sense of presence as much anymore, avatar driven things and digital goods. And so, I'm working with a company that's trying to, and we're not there yet because it's still a lot of AI to be done, and they're Canadian for better or worse, so that you can take virtual fashion and apply it to any picture that you want to apply it to. So if there's a picture of me sitting here like this, and I snap a photo of it, but I want to change it before I post it on Instagram so that I have a Tom Ford suit on, right? I'll pay my $3, I'll click it, and it'll just perfectly fit over my body because of the pose estimation things that are happening in AI. And is that worth it for me to look good in my Instagram picture for $3? Probably, right? And probably a lot of use. Those types of things that are going to happen and are happening that only are happening because of what we've experienced with the pandemic.
Are we going back to working? I just saw Tata, and he has 400,000 employees, and he said he started off with 15% at home, and it's gone to 90. He said he's going to stay at 7. This Tata in India.
Oh, Tata,
yeah, and he said probably 75% of their employees are now going to stay at home. It's over. He said it was over for the office. He felt it was.
I think it's over. I think it'll be different.
Right.
So when I look at my companies, it's okay, let's not talk about going into the office full time. Let's talk about what puts us in the best position to succeed individually and corporately, right? So you still want social interaction, but is, sitting in an office next to somebody the best source of social interaction? Like, I've always used open offices and have for the last 25 years because I wanted that social interaction. But instead of having all that office space, it's just as easy to get together at a restaurant,
Right.
or have in-service days where you rotate people through or group different people together. So, you have 1/20 of the, 1/3, let's say, of the office space, and 33% of your people in there at any one time, but you come up with opportunities and programs that maximize the interaction, right? But when you have interaction, in a typical office, it's all based on proximity. Right? So if you're on the second floor and I'm on the third floor, maybe we see each other in the elevator or at lunch,
Right.
but that's it. There's no real proximity. And so there's no corporate benefit per se. But if you start looking at, okay, how do I maximize the management by walking around, or productivity by touch point? That becomes an algorithm in some respects where you look, you gauge everybody and you start applying this approach to how you lay out your office, but also the work hours in the office versus the work hours.
Right.
And then when you talk to people, everybody's in different circumstances, but if you had a long commute and you had kids, are you happy to give up the hour commute or 40-minute commute both ways and add, an hour and a half to 2 hours to your day? There's a lot of people that are going to say yes to that.
Yeah. Okay. Last two questions. You're going to start Shark Tank. You're going in the bubble. In the next bubble. How is that going to? What are you looking for? And how's that going to happen? You're all going to be in like one hotel room.
So we already had our first one. We did a first bubble for our first pod, and so we were in a hotel, and literally, you talk about being forced to submit to these protocols. We are kept in our room. And then there is a hallway that we have to walk down to a certain elevator, and there are arrows on the floor, arrows on the wall. We go to where our makeup is, they're in full hazmat gear, to put on our makeup. And then we go to set, we're 6.5 feet apart. The entrepreneurs are on the carpet. In the past, they'd walk up, or after we do a deal, we hug or whatever. That's over. But the entrepreneurs also have to quarantine.
Yeah.
For an extended period of time. They're getting tested every other day. And so that's a full commitment. If you're going through that process, you are all in and want to get a deal, right? And so the deals that we saw the first part, and I'm sure it'll be the same the second pod, were intense. They were, bigger companies, stronger companies that really saw the value, and also ones that had been through the pandemic wars already and already had experience. And we're starting to pivot, and more often than not, we're looking for help in those pivots to digital or whatever else. And so, in terms of what I'm looking for, agility, right? Somebody who hopefully makes me say, why didn't I think of that, has complete agility, because who knows how things are going to go through all this, has a strong digital platform or a product that I think I can take digital, and somebody with, intestinal fortitude, because this shit's not easy right now. And between family and employees and going through all this, you've got to be able to fight through it. And those are the things I'll be looking for.
All right. Last question. Here's the world. We have a very fraught political situation in this country and around the world. I think you could say everything's uncertain. In 5 years, what's your best case scenario to all of this, or worst case scenario? Last question. That's the last question.
That's it.
And innovate. What will get us out of a bad case scenario?
I mean, the worst case scenario is the violence we've seen accelerates and amplifies and becomes common. Right now it's isolated, quote unquote, right, around certain incidences in certain cities, and it's awful as is. But if that becomes worse because Trump wins or Trump loses, right? And there's a response to that. That's the worst case. The best case, we get great leadership, and somebody who's willing to sit down and talk to everybody, not just people who agree with him or support him, and goes out there and literally calms people down and doesn't go where it's easy, but goes where it's hard, because that's what it's going to take. Joe Biden doesn't need to be on CNN and MSNBC. He needs to be on Fox News, and vice versa if it's Trump that wins. And, I don't expect this from Trump, but at least potentially with Joe Biden, he can be a leader. He can show some empathy and some compassion, but go and actually reach people who disagree with him.
And
what can right now?
What can leaders like you do, business leaders, innovation leaders, do then? Because there's leadership there too. Yeah,
no question about it. Talk to your employees. Be honest. Be honest and authentic with them. And that's what I try to do. Like with the Mavs right now, our salespeople aren't doing anything because we can't get, we're not selling any tickets. There's right. nothing to go to. And so we're having them go out and to get out the vote programs. We took the American Airlines Center, our arena, and instead of just having it open on election day on November 3rd, we're going to keep it open from the day early voting starts and allow it to be open with 50 to 60 stations the entire time. And we're going to, go out there and help people register to vote and then help get them to polling places from all over the city. Red, red, blue, yellow, green, whatever their persuasion is, we're going to try to get them to vote. And I think that's one thing. And then two, again, particularly in purple states, you want to talk to your employees, and the crazy thing is, even though we have people who support Trump, people who support Biden, people who don't care, they get along. Yeah. When you're in real world, it's never really the problem, it seems, when you look on social media. And I'll say this, one of the things that I just done. So if you look at my tweets now, I saw comments or replies. Yeah. Changes everything. Right. Changes everything. Literally, I highly recommend it. Even though it's fun, historically, to go through and look at the comments and you train yourself to ignore the idiots, right? Yeah. The fact that the idiots aren't there. And so if somebody thinks I'm a communist, right? Mm-hmm. I tweet about Shark Tank, oh, you're a communist, right? Or this or that. They have to tweet that to their 3 followers. Right. Whereas before, my tweets were a platform and they knew as people went through the replies, they would be seen and they can get a response themselves. And they would kind of platform me and platform folks, you and other people with followings and use us, right? So when you talk about things we can do, the vitriol on social media platforms, particularly Twitter, is so intense right now leading up to the election. The best thing that you and I and anybody with a following can do is turn off replies. Yeah. What if you're looking to cause trouble? Well, I'm kidding. I'm teasing. All the trouble. But you know what? Without the replies, you can cause even more trouble because then people get to visualize. Yeah. But that's okay. I mean, I love, me, Kara, I've always loved to mess with people, right? Yes. And so now I try to, turn things around. And so now all the Trump supporters, are now the elitist, right? Because they're no longer the silent majority on social media. They're the vocal minority on social media. And so you get to say these things, but they can't respond to anybody who's listening. So it changes everything. And the ultimate troll, Mark Cuban. So you're optimistic. You sound you sound optimistic, Mark, correct? Would you for entrepreneurship, for innovation globally? Yeah, no question about it. Look, even in the worst of circumstances, there are people with entrepreneurial spirit, and you see them come out of the grime of India, right? The lowest caste of India, and you pick any country in the world where people are challenged, there's going to be an entrepreneur that rises through it and sets an example. That's always going to be the case. And so I'm always excited because I know there's that entrepreneurial spirit around the world and in our country that can change the world. Nothing stays the same. Nothing. There's always change, and somebody is always there to instigate that change. And as long as they're getting support and we're in a world that at least has some positivity to it, then I think we can always have that opportunity for a positive future. All right. Thank you, Mark, so much. I appreciate it. And thank you, Texylvania. Thanks, Texylvania. And thanks as always, Kara. It's always fun.